I'm very excited and honored to welcome David Zollo.
Oh, thank you.
Iowa music icon and legend to the Iowa Music Archive. The goal of this series is to document the history of Iowa music and Iowa musicians.
Cool.
And you have been my white whale for a while.
Right
so I
on.
was so excited that you were going to play a show this evening at Octopus College Hill. And gave me the opportunity to sit and speak with you.
Yeah, oh, it's my pleasure, and I'm honored to be a part of the archive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The first question I'd like to ask you is just if you would just tell us about your early life and your family. Please.
Yeah, sure. So, let's see, I was born in Boston. My brother and I had one older brother, both born in Boston. My folks came from working class East Coast backgrounds. My dad's from a part of southern Connecticut, pretty rough and ready ethnic part of Connecticut, near Waterbury. If you know it, you know what I'm talking about. It's pretty gnarly there still. And then my mom was the daughter of a well-known jazz musician who led the orchestra at a place called the Stork Club in Manhattan for many years. And her mom was from Boston. So when her parents divorced, my mom was about 12, they moved back to Boston. My parents were both first generation college students in their respective families. And my mom went to BU. My mom went to Girls Latin, very poor, but very, very bright. And so she was on a scholarship to Girls Latin, which is the oldest high school in the country. Although she dropped out her final year because she was tired. It was like a 3-hour commute, and she had to work a job, and she was, I followed in her footsteps in that way. As a future dropout myself, she'd be pissed if she could miss it. So my folks met. My dad was at Northeastern. So and both of them big fans of literature. My dad wanted to write prose fiction, and after a couple attempts of applying to University of Iowa's Writers Workshop MFA program, fiction, he got in, and my folks drove across country or halfway across the country and settled in Iowa City. They both fell in love with Iowa, and my brother and I were raised in Iowa City, where I went to grade school, and he went to grade school in junior high, and then we moved to a small town called Wellman, Iowa, which is about 25 miles south, and I went to Mid-Prairie Junior High and high school. And I studied piano at the Prussel School of Music in Iowa City, which was, I believe, the second Suzuki method school in the country. Bill and Doris Prussel, amazing people, especially Doris was a real big influence on my sticking with the piano and not giving it up, which I was always trying to do.
So you started out, you kind of went into my next question about when did you start to play music?
So I was like 4 when I first started taking lessons, and there was a really cool hippie kind of music store downtown Iowa City. I think where Giovanni's, the restaurant, ended up going into, but it was called the Music Shop. And that's where my first teacher was. I had a teacher named Beth. And my dad bought me a copy of, remember John Lennon's Rock and Roll album, the Phil Spector record? He got me a copy of that. And the very first song I remember was Stand By Me, the Benny King too. And then that place closed, and so for a couple of years I didn't have any instructor. And then I think maybe I was 8 when I started at Prussel, 7 or 8. And then I had a teacher. I think she graduated from Iowa's. They had a PhD in performance. Concert piano performance that she had gotten, and so she came right to Prussel, and so I was one of her first students, Lori Chrisman, and she was a huge influence. The 3 women, Doris Prussel, Lori Chrisman, and my mom, who kind of kept me, even when I was hanging on by a thread, even when I was bribing, my teacher to say, 1 Led Zeppelin for 1 Beethoven. What do you say? Even, Steven? No? Yeah? Great teachers. And Lori's still around. She taught my son, who ended up graduating from Prussel, a much better classical pianist than I ever could have hoped to be. But yeah, I mean, that family and that school had a massive impact, on my family, many Iowa City families, or families from the area. I mean, if you'd have to be from another place to not realize that that's not a normal kind of thing. And they were most known for their string, their string performance. But both Doris and Bill were well-known instructors of of classical string music, and their family. Their son went on to run the Cleveland Quartets. I think he was played with Yo-Yo Ma and Emmanuel Axe, the piano player that accompanied Yo-Yo Ma. I mean, they just an amazing family. And so all these young people have gone through that school and just been impacted by it. So that was a real big influence on my life as a child and as an adult.
Yeah, continues to be an influence.
Yeah, it continues to be an influence.
In addition to those strong females that you described,
Yeah.
you talked about your family coming to Iowa and your dad being a part of the writer's workshop. Excuse me.
Yeah.
What influence does that play on your music?
Well, so I was, I wanted to also write prose of some kind, whether fiction or nonfiction, and so that was kind of the direction that I thought I was going to head when I went to Iowa as an undergraduate, enrolled in the English department. I wound up doing more work in the American Studies department because the English department was so locked into kind of French deconstructionist bullshit, if I can say that. Can I say that? Is it all right to curse? Okay, yeah, bullshit. And I just couldn't get behind it. There was that whole thing about, it was all about literary theory and staying away. It's like if you can read John Steinbeck and not talk about, the time and that in which he wrote, then you're a better person than I am. So I went into American Studies, did a lot of work on jazz history, and wrote a thesis about my grandfather's life. My grandfather was known because he was Bobby Hackett, the great trumpet player's mentor, and gave him his first trumpet. Bobby Hackett was kind of a prodigy guitar player from Providence, Rhode Island, who my grandfather was instructed by one of the gangsters he worked. This is the summer that Prohibition was lifted, 33. My grandpa had a trio gig on Cape Cod and had sent a train ticket to P.B. Russell, the great clarinetist. So they had come up together in vaudeville, along with the great trombone player Jack Teagarden. So those guys were very tight. My grandfather, his name was Payson Ray, R.E., so he had Pee Wee on the one gig, and Pee Wee had been playing. He's from St. Louis, had been playing with Vic Beiderbecke, who had passed away a year and a half before. So my grandpa sent him one ticket, and then he got a call from I don't even know which gangster it was, but who said, "Yeah, you got to hire this kid. He's from Providence, just finished high school. He's really talented." I don't think it was a request. I think it was an order. So that was the third. It was a trio, a summer-long, back when they did that, a summer-long gig. And so after a show one night, my grandfather drunkenly spent the money from the gig on a cornet, and he told Pee Wee Russell that, now you teach him to play like Bix. Pee Wee was great to play multiple instruments, and that's kind of what happened. Got Hackett started early in Hackett's career. He was obviously, I think, lacking somewhat in his his technical abilities, but it didn't take long for him to, to show his prowess. So I was still able to kind of to dig around. This is in pre-internet age, so it was hard to find some information, but I managed to do a pretty good job. He did a lot of stuff since he led the orchestra at the Stork Club. There was a lot of stuff recorded for NBC, and Walter Winchell, the journalist, broadcast from the Stork Club. And my grandfather was often leading the orchestra that was playing, when he was doing his broadcast. So.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
And he died when I was pretty young, so I didn't get to know him. But he was certainly always a real presence. So there was the literary side. My dad was a big Walt Whitman fan, as I am. My band is named after a Whitman poem. I've got Walt Whitman tattoos all over my body, which is strange, but there's worse things to be a fetishist for. So Whitman's work was a big, almost more in its philosophy, its approach, its kind of democratic worldview, that really shaped the way I approached, being a band leader and writing songs and just, being a part of the process.
A moment ago, you talked about getting John Lennon's rock and roll record. Mm-hmm. When you were coming up and learning, what music inspired you and what still inspires you in music?
It's funny. Like my dad's record collection, the music when I was a small child, I probably would say, 1972, as far as rock and roll is concerned, is still maybe my touchstone year. Little Feat, Sailing Shoes with Randy Newman. I think it was either Good Old Boys or Sail Away, maybe, what came out that year. Just all these great records. I'm a big fan of that year. But I listened to also, I was a big fan of what they now call the new wave of British heavy metal. Being a classical piano student, there was something about that wanker in the way that neoclassicism that appealed to me. I'm sure other things about it. I won't go into that. Yeah, so it also drove my dad crazy. I mean, you cannot, as a young person, listen to rock and roll and not have some. And that was the one thing that my dad could not abide by, at least at that time. My dad had an amazing record collection and used to teach classes in Iowa on the history of popular American music. So he definitely knew his stuff. But he hated to hear me playing Number of the Beast or Piece of Mind or Ronnie James Dio or some of my favorites from the era. But really, like the records that he was listening to when I was 2, 3, 4 years old, Layla, Astral Weeks, the first 2 Springsteen records, and then everything from Beggar's Banquet to Exile on Main Street, and Goat's Head Soup as well. Those, those were all big records in my childhood, and then a lot of jazz and blues and honky-tonk music that he also listened to. So those were all influences that I ended up, revisiting at various times in my musical life, and still do. I'm afraid to say that in terms of being, hip to what's happening contemporaneously, not so much.
Not so much. What'd you listen to on your way to Cedar Falls?
Okay, I'm glad you asked. I left the house with listening to Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap. Huge Bon Scott fan.
Yes.
And then I think, I went from there to Peter Green, Fleetwood Mac, and then Play On, which it's another guy who's a huge influence. In fact, when I started High and Lonesome, my first band, which was named after a Jimmy Reed song, I was listening to those first 2 Fleetwood Mac records a lot, Mr. Wonderful and Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, and I still love those records. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Peter Green's. And then what else? Oh, I listened to Elvis Costello's Greatest Hits, and there's one other thing I was listening to that. That's escaping me, but yeah, that pretty much does it.
That sounds like an amazing playlist. I'll go on a ride with you anytime.
Yeah, right on it. Yeah.
You've been a member of many great bands.
Well, thank you.
Including High and Lonesome. You were part of Todd Snider's Nervous Rex. Mm-hmm. Your current band, The Body Electric. Yeah. And Middle Western. Bo Ramsey's band. Bo Ramsey's
for a while.
Band. Yep. What is your favorite part of playing in a band? And what's the hardest part of playing in a band? There's
nothing hard about, playing to me as a member of a band. If as long as the interpersonal, relationships are where they should be and everybody's, acting like, as close. I mean, look, man, if you've chosen rock and roll as your vocation, you're not really going to be much of an adult by the culture standards. But it's very important to me that we treat one another with, decency, and we listen. And so those are the things. Big ears, to me is the key to anything. So listening to the people you're playing with, and but yeah, I mean, playing great songs. I played, as a piano player for Todd Snider, Greg Brown, and William Elliott Whitmore. Now, those are 3 prolific and great songwriters. And I just can't find a single thing not to like about being able to play these great songs for guys with real, strong artistic vision and whose instincts. I mean, Todd and Greg and Will, all 3 of them. I've been in the studio with all 3 of them many times, and their instincts were just, impeccable. And I tracked, things that, first time I heard of something on a keyboard I didn't like the sound of, and I remember recording on a record of Todd's called Peace Queer, and it was like a Baldwin Fun Machine organ. First time I heard the song, more chords than I was expecting. First take, print it. Oh, that's great. And I was like, wait, can I have another go at that? No, it's good. Bye. But they were right. They were right. Well, it was certainly, I think, what he was going for. Yeah. And so, it really taught me too a lot about trusting, the instincts. If you're going to work with someone, then it's really important to give them that trust and respect across the board. I consider that to be the way I approach being a band leader or a side person. You know, it's really about trust and. You know, it's High and Lonesome for all the great qualities it had as a rough and ready rock and roll outfit. There was some issues in that regard. And if you're going to, you know, expect one another to be vulnerable, especially in your 20s, which is a time, you know, when there's, you know, you're gonna get the piss taken out of you all the time. You gotta have people that you feel like. Are behind you, and that you can get behind, and so that's an important thing too. You know, to me, is if you're going to expect somebody to really let it all hang out and go to those places that you can go to, playing improvisational music, you know, night in and night out, where nothing is really kind of scripted, and where you're always, you know, I mean, because that's one of the things I love about playing, you know, the kind of music I play, is that there's a lot of room for that. But yeah, there's got to be an understanding that, you know, we have to support one another, or ugliness can ensue pretty quickly. And unfortunately, yeah, it did with High and Lonesome. And but you know, I mean, it's all water under the bridge.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Trailer Records. I wanted to ask some questions about maybe what prompted you to begin Trailer Records, and for those who are watching or listening, I just want to give a short list of some of the artists that were part of this amazing label. It included High and Lonesome, Bo Ramsey, Joe and Vicky Price, Greg Brown, Brother Trucker, and more.
Yes.
The roster is incredible.
Yeah.
So what prompted this label?
So it started, so Radislav Lorkovich had been, you know, Rad and Greg and Bo had been, you know, loosely working under the Shed Records name, but that was the late '80s, and you know, the industry was certainly in a state of flux, I would say. You know, they were moving from vinyl to CDs, tape to digital. All these different things were going on, and Radislav ended up, I think, going on the road with someone. And I kind of stepped in and was playing piano with Greg and Bo both. This was, you know, '92, the very beginning of my career. And there just wasn't... Now, Greg obviously had Red House, but we wanted something a little, you know, funkier and more under the radar, and that was more local. And so it just kind of fell to me, I think, as the young guy with enough energy to handle it. I mean... Yeah, that's how it started. And then, you know, I mean, just the way I was raised, you know, I've always been a big believer in, you know, the kind of the family atmosphere. My dad's the oldest of 10. His family is very, very close and very supportive of one another. And I've seen, you know, what can come out of that. You know, you can do a lot with very little. There's a real, even though my punk rock friends would hate that I say this, is a real punk rock ethos behind what Trailer Records was about, which was, I mean, it was me and a small balance credit card, and then just, you know, a belief in the music and the music from this area. And B.J. Fleming was a woman from who had moved to Ames from Texas, just a lovely human being, and the Pines. So Bo's son Benson had lived with my wife and I when we were staying in town, and I would say we moved to the country about 20 years ago, actually this year. So yeah, and these were all, you know, it was all just, I met Andy Fleming from Brother Trucker, and I just thought those guys were amazing people, and he's an amazing writer, and produced their first few records. And it was just, you know, if you look back, especially on the, you know, the first kind of batch of records that we made for Trailer, it was all about a family atmosphere. We played on each other's records. We worked with Tom Tapman here in Cedar Falls, or down in Iowa City with John Speck. Those were two very common names in our in the label, like as far as engineers and producers. But then, you know, we had Sandy Dias that did a lot of our photography. So there was a real kind of unified feeling to the music, even though everybody wasn't playing stuff from the same genre exactly. I felt like the sense of place is what drew us all together, and that was something that really drove, the whole thing. And I also didn't know any better. If I would have known then what I know now, as they say, I never would have done it. But I'm glad I did, glad I did. It was a learning experience and just an adventure. And, looking back, I'm really, really grateful and proud of what was accomplished and it was the people and the music. It really wasn't me. Or even the label. It was the people and the music and that sense of a shared identity and a kind of family vibe. And that's, I think, when that's what's motivating you, anything's possible.
You've captured a few of these things, but I would like to ask you, what were your favorite moments and artists during that time? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
With quite a roster.
Yeah.
And then kind of what was your role in the releases? You talked about it being kind of a family affair.
Yeah.
But I've heard some stories about your roles
in
some of those records, and most of them were good.
Yeah, most. So, some of them I produced, some I played on, some I just watched from a distance. It's an intricate and nuanced business. And I didn't know anything about it really. And I was learning as I went. So any regrets I have would be that I just wasn't more business savvy. On the other hand, I do have a real socialist streak. I have Italian. I think it runs in the blood.
Yeah.
I gave 50% of the gross proceeds back to the artist. That was, which was not a good business plan, but a good, just plan in general. But there was distribution issues. I was finally put on me, hey, we need national distribution and we need these publicists. That was the beginning of the end, because once we tried to become like bigger labels, once we were in a position to merit those kinds of trappings of success, the label was done for. The label was at its best when it flew under the radar, when it was something that people could discover and share. But you can't stay at that level and continue to put out records by people like Greg Brown. I think we had about a 12 or 13 year run, and that was a good run. I was involved, so Greg's Over and Under, which is some of his fans, favorite when it comes to his work, and mine as well. I probably hand stuffed, 8,000 or 9,000 envelopes, with copies of Over and Under, and addressed them to, wherever they were going. And it would be like, Anton Fig from David Letterman's band 1 minute, and some, housewife asking me to pander for her. Thanks, literally. There was a lot of work, a lot of, but, I had a lot of energy then. I got to know the local post office employees really well, too.
Yeah. Trailer Records, in my opinion, claims 2 of the greatest live Iowa recordings in High and Lonesome's Live from Gabe and Bo Ramsey and the Backsliders Live.
Yeah.
What contributed to these masterpieces?
That's very kind of you to say that. I don't know if that's how I would characterize the records. So, High and Lonesome had made Alack a Day. And there was a lot of excitement behind the band. There was a lot of, we were drawing huge crowds. So we weren't ready to go back in the studio. And I, as a fan of live records, I thought, hey, let's put out a live one. And then Bo, who was in the same place, he made Down to Bastrop here at Catamount with Tom Tapman. And I think Bo was kind of, not ready yet to make a new record, but wanted to get some more music in. So I think it was a year later that he did his live record. I can definitely say from High and Lonesome's perspective, that recording really captured something that is hard to capture. It was most of our first band. It was a crazy outfit and a crazy time. But it did, and John Speck did a good job of. We recorded 2 shows, one at the Yacht Club and one at Gabe's. In the Gabe show, we ended up just using, that, not the entire show, but that was the show we used, and it was something else. And then Bo, I really love that record of his.
I do too.
Live record, yeah.
Many people do.
Yeah, and of course Al Scher's contributions to that record are enormous. It was a really fun time, and the live records are a good way to capture, I think, the energy, especially, like I said, for High and Lonesome, you were never going to get that in the studio. The band was live was so just unself-conscious. We just didn't know enough, didn't know any better. And that's a good thing. That's a good place to be. It's a short, it only lasts a short time. And then I had, not long after that, they found tumors in my larynx while I was here recording at Catamount, making my first solo recording in the morning on my way from home, and wound up sending my career on a different trajectory, certainly.
Would you share about the impact of your diagnosis on your career path?
So I was 25. I was here at Catamount making my first solo recording with Tom Tapman and Jon Chamberlain. We were doing just a bunch of songs that I had that were kind of different than High and Lonesome. Not that different, actually. But so I assembled a band. It was Bo Ramsey, Marty Christensen, and Eric Griffin, and myself. And then Al Scher's played on a few things, and Al Murphy played on a few things. But in the meantime, I started finding myself unable to sing the way I'd always sung. And now I should point out, I'm not a trained singer. My bass player from the Body Electric, Ryan Berneman, has a voice degree from Iowa. He's a wonderful singer and trained. I didn't really know much about what I was doing or the anatomy and the way that it's affected by singing, except that I used to have voice majors at the University of Iowa come up to me after our shows and say, please let me show you a thing or two, because you are going to suffer real damage to your larynx. So I was at Catamount, and it was not getting better, it was getting worse. I saw a doctor up here, and he just did an examination with a light, not even a scope, and he said, "Oh, doesn't look good." So they sent me Iowa, University of Iowa. Fortunately, at the time, still had a really, really well-respected and well-known otolaryngology clinic. So they did a scope of my larynx, and it turned out that the guy who ended up being my surgeon noticed immediately that there was what he thought were tumors under some precancerous indicators, leukoplakia and dysplasia, different kinds of cells massed together that were indications that something was going to be bad once they got into it. So like a polypoid removal surgery might be 30 or 40 minutes. So this was a 5-hour surgery with some kind of reconstructive qualities to it. So at the time, I thought, well, we'll just put this on the back burner, my record, and my voice will be back in a year. And it turned out to be 10 or 12 years before I got what I would consider a full voice. I spoke this year, so I had this amazing surgeon named Harry Hoffman, who's still at Iowa, who had grown up in Nashville and went to Vanderbilt and did all his academic work at Vanderbilt. And then I had a speech pathologist named Kitty Verdellini, who's gone on to just huge heights in her career. But this was her last year teaching, so she asked me to address her voice disorders class at, I think she's at Delaware now. But she teaches, she's amazing. She was a singer But her backstory is incredible too. It's not my story to tell, but an amazing story. And she had spent a lot of time in Italy. I had just gotten back from Italy. Her husband was an Italian surgeon who had died tragically in Iowa City. So we had all these things in common. And I kind of kept in touch with her. She went to Harvard and then she went to Pitt. Got her divinity degree. She's one of these people with like a handful of PhDs, and just an amazing woman. So I spoke at her voice disorders class, and she asked me, how long it took for my voice to come back, and I told her 10 years, and she was like, hey, don't write that down. That's not normal. And it's not. So, I think I was very fortunate to not lose the ability to speak. That was certainly a concern. But a bigger concern was not being able to sing again. They really don't have any idea when they cut on the larynx how it will heal. So there's a thing called the submucosal wave, which is what the larynx does to make sound. If there's any scarring of the larynx, then that submucosal wave is interrupted and you can't make sound, or there's air that's going to escape. So I was really lucky that the surgery, there was a woman from UCLA, a surgeon herself, in fact, a faculty member who was there studying that procedure with the surgeon who did my surgery. And she woke me up like post-op and was like, look at the elegant work that Harry does. Like, morphine. Except I couldn't talk. So it was, to say that it impacted my career and my life is an understatement. But that was the thing. So I opened up for Todd Snider in Iowa City, and he offered me the job playing piano with him. I probably wouldn't have taken that gig had I not been recovering from that surgery. That was only a few months after the surgery. And my voice lacked a character. And this is an interesting thing, but because there was, this was all like, they used something called fibrin glue, which is your own blood frozen to build back up tissue that they removed. And so I don't know if it's like, muscle memory or if there's but there was not a real quality to that. So for years, my voice, as it built back into the instrument that it's become, just had a strange, smooth, characterless quality, which really shook me up. It was really, now I never stopped singing. I pushed right through and I made records, and I'm glad that I did, but it really has, yeah. It's been a really impactful thing. And then it was also, there was the cancer scare part of it too. And so there was these two, to have a mortality event at that age is a big deal. But also then to have, my career, which was only 2 years underway, or 2.5 years underway, to be kind of stopped. And then I had to reorder a lot of things. And it led me to becoming addicted to drugs, which they had to give me. If I would have coughed, in the first few weeks to a month after that surgery, it would have just ruptured the larynx. So that was a really important part of my post-operative care, was not coughing. If you ask any doctor and they're honest, that the only thing that's going to do that is something that's codeine or morphine based, because dextromethorphan is nice, I guess, in a pinch, but it's not a real cough suppressant. Only opiates really do that. And so it was, and that led me down another path that really was, had a huge impact on me personally. And so, it's, the surgery ended up shaping my life in ways that I never expected. But in the end, it also puts you in a place where, first of all, when you're 25, having a good hubris killer like that is not a bad thing. A little forced humility, and it does. It put a lot of stuff in perspective, just in terms of what was valuable and what was important to me. And I had to, make it out the other side of that, which was probably another surgery. Was 95, and it was probably until 2007 7 before I got cleaned up. And remarried my ex-wife and raised my son. You know, it was a rough road, and you know, to say that I'm lucky to be here again is also an understatement. So, but it's part of my journey and my story, and it's important to me to share that too, because, you know, right now especially, there's so many young people struggling with that. You know, really, in fact, if I had one message to young people, it probably wouldn't involve music. It would involve, you know, drugs and alcohol and the many things that they need to be cognizant of and wary of, because, you know, I don't want to be the old man that had his fun and tell his kids to get their shit together. But, you know, depending on what your genetic makeup is, you know, especially with alcohol, could be the worst of them. You know, if you're a male pattern chromosomal alcoholic, I mean, it's one drink and it's off to the races, trying to get yourself cleaned up. So yeah, as an alcoholic and a drug addict, you know, every day is kind of something that you have to, you know, be aware and be cognizant of the fact that you're just one drink or one drug use away from dying. And that's what is going on now. You know, the fact that there's 120,000, 100,000 overdose deaths a year in this country is disgraceful. And that it mostly affects, you know, it's become the #1 killer of people 20 to 40. It's insane. But yeah, it's a scary time.
So the story that I love, you mentioned Al shares.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of people think that Bo Ramsey's live record was all recorded at STEBS, and we know it was not.
Yeah.
And there was a time I was here in this club, and Al was here, and I said, gosh, I remember Bo's band just being lights out amazing during those shows in that time period. Why wasn't it from STEBS? And he said, well, we were all set up. STEBS was our bar. We had amazing shows there. Mm-hmm. And that night we recorded, everybody was watching the TV in a white Bronco.
Yeah.
And he said, so it just really wasn't the show that we wanted.
Sure.
And he goes, so we used one song because we felt we had to, because STEBS was such an important place.
Wait, now Al says that they were at STEBS that night?
Yes.
We were at STEBS that night.
Oh.
I wonder.
Our history is backwards.
No, we might have been on the same bill.
Oh.
I don't recall Al being there, but I know for sure that High and Lonesome was there, because I'll never forget. The 12 people there were all watching the TV up in the corner, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe we were on the bill.
Yeah.
God, I had some great times at STEBS. I'll never forget playing with Mojo Nixon, and we did our sound checking. He ran up to David Matthews, one of our guitar players. He's like, where the hell do you think you are, the Fillmore East, boy? Relax, motherfucker. It's like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? Beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah. This is hard.
I love that story from Al. So that's great that you may remember that.
Yeah.
We may have to check on that.
Yeah, check on that. I'm curious.
What legacy does Trailer Records leave behind for future independent labels?
I think, you know, like, for example, Andy Fleming took very much to heart, like, you know, the things that I did with and for them, and has made it a real part of his work life to give back to, you know, when he sees, and he's also continued to create a family atmosphere around that band and what they do. And I think, so that's one thing. I think some of the musicians involved, you know, that weren't maybe totally set in their ways, carried some of those philosophies with them. The ones that were tenable, and not all of the philosophies that were behind Trailer Records were, you know. There was just, you know, it would have been much better if we would have had, you know, a business person, you know, running the label, if we would have had a Peter Jesperson, as it were, to do some of those things. But it's not how it happened, and that's fine too. Yeah. But so that's one of the things. But then there's, you know, there's some young musicians around who remember, or whose parents, you know, were fans of the label and bands on the label, who have gone back to check out some of the music and explore some of those things. So I like to think, you know, that the label was working in a tradition. We had, you know, my dad was good buddies with Joe Price, Patrick Hazel especially, but also Bo, but really Pat and Joe more so. And so I was around those guys a lot as a kid, and I watched them. And then, of course, my grandfather. I always felt like playing music, being an itinerant musician was a possibility for me. And that's a huge thing. I don't know if that's true today, but at least, performing and having, young musicians and singer-songwriters be able to see that is really important. And having all the kinds of things in place so that they can maybe start their career here and then move on to, if they want to a place where there's more industry. To me, the lack of an industry in Iowa was a godsend, and was how we were able to create a really unique voice, I think. But whatever the choice, but there's got to be certain things in place for young people to be able to come out of a place that gives them enough to build up their craft to where they can go take it on the road.
Yeah, you made the comment earlier about your punk rock friends would dislike that.
Yeah.
But really, it was a very DIY approach.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
You made your own scene.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's an amazing legacy.
Yeah.
That's why people come back to those records.
I think so.
And they are still celebrated.
Yeah, and I think there's some, there was a real honesty and a real, earnestness to the work. Not in a bad way, but in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. You tour extensively, and you have for many, many years. Yeah. What, in your opinion, makes an amazing venue, and can you think of clubs that really helped your journey?
Oh, absolutely. The venue, an amazing venue is just like an amazing scene. It's made up by the people. I was doing a thing for the Daily Iowan did a little short documentary about the end of the mill, and the mill is one of those places. Yes. And Keith Dempster, that was the first place I played what I would consider, a professional gig. Even though I did get really drunk and take all my clothes off. I had a piano, I was behind the piano. There was like 4 people there. One of them was Dave Moore, and I remember watching me in the mirror going, what the hell did I come here? But Keith and Pam were like, a big brother and big sister. Pam especially, I brought my son right after he was born to see her. She was in the hospital with terminal lung cancer, and it was a real powerful moment for me. But it was the people that made the place, and without the people, it doesn't matter, like it's just 4 walls and, a bunch of, sheetrock and insulation. So the people are what make it. And once you get to that place where you understand that the magic comes from the relationships, the physical place doesn't matter quite so much, but the mill was one, Gabe's was another, and STEBS was a third. Those were 3 places that, and the yacht club too, that had a real impact. Oh, the Sanctuary, which just closed. Bo and I had some really magical nights at the Sanctuary. But yeah, Shuba's in Chicago was another place we played a lot. That was a great venue for us. But my friend Gunner's Bar, Gunners,
I remember.
which was after the yacht club closed. Yeah, it was we were very fortunate to have a lot of venues, performed, live music performed by, people playing instruments was a big thing then. It's less so now, and that's fine too. It's just like whatever the delivery system for the music you like is, almost secondary to I'm not a big fan of making qualitative judgments about rock and roll. It's all valid if it's got a place, then it's got a place, right? So
relationships are important. Connection is important.
Relationships are everything. Yeah.
And live music is exactly what you just described.
Yeah.
It allows you to do all of those things.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like any microcosm. It's like it is our life writ small. And so those things are important. And they're often, I think, taken for granted when we look back or we look forward about the things that we need to create, a healthy environment in which to be, to be artists or whatever, to make music. Yeah.
So speaking of that, knowing that the world has changed.
Yeah.
What advice do you, yes, it has. What advice do you have for young artists who are starting their career?
Play with as many musicians as possible. I met this has been really enjoyable. Young friend of my son's who's in his graduating class at City High in Iowa City. is a singer-songwriter. Him and his dad had a real connection around the music of Bob Dylan, so they would go see Dylan play. And somehow, I think his dad might have given him one of my records. And so he called my son up and was like, Rocco, your dad rocks. And Rocco's like, no, oh, come on. But he, you know, I met him and got to know him. And so I brought him to a show in Des Moines last week, and he played between our sets. I mean, he did a great job. Nervous as hell, but he did a great job. And all the people there, you know, people are so generous when they see something like that happening. And, I haven't had that opportunity for a long time just because there's less people that do what I did. And you know, so I'm not in as much of a position to help. But that's been real enjoyable to have a young musician around and help him make a record and do some of that stuff. And that's important to me to have that, those connections. But really, I would tell any young person just to go, play shows and find out what works for them. And because, an audience is always going to tell you that's going to be, that'll be where you understand what works and what doesn't work. And if you want to be a performer, that's important. If you want to write songs at your house, which is another thing you can do, and then it's not as important. But you're going to learn a lot from the audience and from other musicians, because I had really amazing mentors, and I spent a lot of nights on stage with Bo and in his band, and, a lot of nights, and learned so much, and from Greg, and from Dave Moore, and from Joe, all the folks. Those guys were 20 years older than me, and so that was, and they'd all been playing music for at least that long, professionally. So, yeah, I was really, really fortunate for those guys to take me under their wings.
Perfect. Okay, so I have a few oddball questions.
Yes.
These are from your former bandmates.
Uh-huh.
So something I like to do to prepare for interviews is reach out to people.
Uh-oh.
So I'm going to tell you who they're
Jim
from.
Viner.
Jim Viner, yep, that's who I'm starting with. How did you guess?
Oh, because he's a funny fucker, that Jim Viner.
So he said, please ask him if he has any memories of our tour of Italy with High and Lonesome.
Yeah.
And playing on The Tonight Show with Todd Snider.
I do have memories of playing in Italy. That was a raggedy ass tour. So my first tour in Italy was right after Bo, Radislav, and Dave had gone, and so they had given the promoter a copy of the High and Lonesome record. So then I went by myself, and my first tour was opening for Ramblin' Jack Elliott and Joe Henry, who doesn't perform anymore, but is an amazing, brilliant dude. But then we brought the band a couple years later, so I was recovering. It was a month or two out of the surgery on my larynx, which I should not have been singing or traveling or doing anything. And it's difficult to bring a band overseas just because it's expensive. But I have really fond memories of that time. I do. Except I lost my cool. We played in Sicily. This is a good story, actually. We played in Sicily, and everybody, our promoter at the time was based in northern Italy. So there's a lot of antipathy between the two places, and they kept warning us about the Sicilians. Don't look at any women at all, ever, period. It's like, come on, man, get the fuck out of here. So we go down, we play the show, and the guy hands me a big wad. So this is before the euro, so this is lira, it was like 1,800 lira to the dollar, something crazy. So he hands me a big wad of paper money, and then gives me the most convoluted directions to our hotel. And so we're on our way to the hotel, and after about 3 hours of driving, so Dustin Connor, the bass player, may he rest in peace, was supposed to be navigating, which, to his credit, there was no hotel. So, what was he going to navigate? But we're lost in the mountains, and I'm yelling at Dustin, and then it dawned on me, you better check the money. And of course, I pulled out this wad of money, and it was like the equivalent of $2 wrapped around a bunch of newspaper. It's like,
no, I'm sorry.
The double whammy.
Yeah.
Which again, you can laugh now, but at the time.
And this is why Viner brings this up.
Oh yeah. One of many reasons. I'm sure Jim remembers a lot of things that I would also be mortified by, but that's Bless his heart.
So speaking of Brother Trucker, in the not too distant past, we recorded a live album for Brother Trucker right here.
Wonderful.
And Mike Fitzpatrick wanted, like, one of the songs that we all, I recorded it, I helped record it. That's about the extent of my involvement.
Sure, that's great.
But having said that, one of the things we all wanted to hear on that record was Brother Trucker's version of
Parnell. I love that version.
And we do too. And
Right
Mike
on.
said, I'd like you to ask him how he feels about Parnell being on a Brother Trucker.
Oh, I think it's so cool. That's flattering. They did $15 on a record that I worked with them on, and they did a great job of that.
Yes.
Oh, I mean, you know, I have nothing but love and respect for all of those guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jim, who I go back further with, but all those guys, and Andy and Mike and Lyle, beautiful people, and yeah, I've been totally edified by my relationship with those guys from the beginning, and yeah, no, I like their version of Parnell. It's an honor, and it's flattering that great of a songwriter would be interested in doing one of my songs.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And last but not least, Ivonne, from your days at STEBS.
Yeah, bless her heart. She's a great one too.
She is, yes. And she said, what was it like to play with Steve Chief Hayes?
Man, Steve Hayes, such a great drummer, but such a great guy. Him and Viner share a sense of humor, a great sense of humor. They're both funny as hell. Chief was a laugh a minute, but you know, he was one of the guys, you know, because there was often times where I was the only person, you know, of my age around those guys, and Steve always kept it, you know, light and loose, and was always so accommodating and open. And as funny as he was, it was his, you know, his heart, big heart, that I remember playing, you know, the most about playing with him. Steve is a beautiful guy. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't seen him since the pandemic, but he had some health issues. I don't know if you know about that, but yeah, he's a great guy, a great musician. Everybody in that band was.
And the last one's not a question, but Andy Fleming, who had a million amazing things to say about you. He said, when I think about Dave Zollo, he said, I think about being in Cedar Falls and being at our hotel. We were recording our record, and he said, I remember Dave sleeping on a sleeping bag between our beds and singing Mike Fitzpatrick what he thought the solo should sound like. And he said, that is just such an amazing, beautiful memory of him helping us.
Great memory. I don't remember that,
started.
but
yeah,
I love that. That's a great memory. You know, I share a memory of those guys. We were getting ready to do their first record in Iowa City, and we were watching, I believe, the Rams and the Titans, the famous game with the backward pass, I guess. I think it was the playoffs, but yeah, and sitting there with my boxer, and Andy's become a huge proponent of the dog breed, but yeah, I think we had both our boxers then, yeah, and just those guys, beautiful dudes. That's, you know, if I can say one thing about having spent my entire adult life to this point as an itinerant independent musician, it's the people that I've been able to work with have just done so much to make my life a better thing than it would have otherwise been. And those guys are a great example of that. And or Matt Cullen, who moved here and looked me up completely out of the blue, and we got to know each other. And he's from a tiny town in western Massachusetts where my aunt lives. I mean, what are the odds? A town of like 800 people, Munson, Massachusetts. So anyway, yeah, those things, you know, those people, those things, those memories. Yeah, those are the things that we can stand on and feel good about.
Yes. Mr. David Zollo, it has been an absolute honor
my
to
pleasure.
speak to you.
Thank you.
And have a chance to capture a little bit of your career and your history and the impact that you've had on so many other musicians.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you for being part of the Iowa Music
My
Archive.
pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thanks, man.